Thank you guys all for joining us today. We're really excited for this conversation, and no, on a Friday afternoon, it is a great time to kind of have some time and space to hear from our new faculty. And so I'm really excited. We have Drs. Dion Benton, Christina Zapeta, and coming in 2023, Dr. Kristia Mihari. So excited to have you guys all here. And our wonderful friend, Meg Saylor, is going to help us facilitate this conversation. I'm Hasina, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and just a couple of quick things. We are recording the session, and also we have enabled the live closed captioning if that's something that would be helpful to you. And so with that, please feel free to keep your cameras on or off, depending on what feels most comfortable to you. We will have some time, hopefully at the end, for any questions, but also feel free to use the chat to add questions as we go along. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Meg Saylor.
Hey. Hello, everybody. I am Meg Saylor, and I have the great fortune of being in the department that these fine folks are going to be part of for many years to come. So I'm going to go ahead and get the questions started. And so my strategy is going to be to ask a question and let the three of you make a decision about who would like to answer the question first. And if that strategy doesn't work so well, I will be more directive with who should talk when, but we'll see how it goes. So to start with, if you could each tell us a little bit about your research or your teaching interests and how you got interested in the area that you focus on. So who wants to take a first crack at that question?
I'm happy to take a first crack.
All right,
so I'm Dion, and first off, let me thank you, Meg, for sort of orchestrating this whole thing, Hasina for organizing it, and for keeping us on track. I'm super excited to be here virtually, obviously. Now, what do I study? I am a cognitive developmental scientist, which is a mouthful. What that means is I study how infants and how young children, how their thinking and reasoning abilities develop, right? And in my work, I focus these days on two broad topics. So the first topic concerns how young babies learn to evaluate others based on their actions, right? So everyone in this room, in this virtual room, has no difficulty figuring out who among them are good people and bad people, right? And this is obviously an important capacity because if your calculus is wrong, that could mean in the worst case death, right? If you interact with the wrong person. And so this is obviously an important ability. And so in my lab, I sort of ask, well, when do babies gain that capacity? But more importantly for me, how does that capacity come about? How do they go from not having it to having it, right? And so I do a number of, I'm in the process of getting ready to do a number of studies that look at this. But on the other hand, I also study how babies reason about and perceive cause and effect, right? To navigate the world effectively, we have to realize and we have to distinguish between things that actually cause actions and effects and things that are just merely correlated with them, right? And so there too, I'm sort of interested in when this happens, but I'm more interested in how babies go from not having it to having it, right? And to address these questions, I use experiments. So I actually bring little babies into the lab. In fact, our first baby is scheduled to come in next week to do some of our work on causality. So we're really excited about that. So I do experiments with babies. And for those who are on this call who don't actually do baby work, I study babies as young as 2.5 months of age. And so you might ask, well, how the heck do you know what babies know? Like babies, at least before they're 12 months of age, they can't speak, right? And so you can't ask them, I mean, you could, right? But you wouldn't get anything useful from them. And so the question is, how do we like study what it is they know? Well, one thing we do, all of us do from birth, is we look, right? We look at things that are interesting. And so we take advantage of that. And babies, like much like us, we tend to focus on things that are surprising or things that are new. Babies do the same thing. So if you show them something that's surprising, they'll look long. So like a good example is, you and I know, everyone here knows that if I'm holding a cup and I release the cup, what do you expect to happen? You expect the cup to fall, right? It's not going to just remain suspended in the air. Well, babies seem to have this intuition as well by about 8 months of age. That is, they look much longer when the thing is like suspended in the air, right? And so we use looking time. Now, how did I get involved with this work? Well, it was by happenstance. I was an undergrad at University of Arizona in an honors program. And as an honors student, one of the requirements was that to graduate with honors, you had to complete an honors thesis. And so because I was a psych major, I knew that I would have to do some kind of research. I didn't know what kind of research I wanted to do. And so I actually emailed a whole bunch of professors, and I was lucky enough to hear back from a few of them. And one of them in particular stood out. So I ended up going to work in a lab, an infant lab. And I did visit a couple of and try other labs, but those didn't really work out. And I fell in love with the infant research because it's tough work. You have to be clever. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'll let my other two colleagues sort of say something. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Dion. That was great. All right. Krista, good. I saw you unmuted.
So briefly, my work is, the overall goal of my work is moving towards a world where teenagers are safe, where they have the opportunities to pursue lives that are good for them. And so I do that in a couple of different ways. One is through looking at positive youth development and how we can promote positive youth development. And another way is through thinking about how we can prevent youth violence, in addition to just trying to understand the predictors and outcomes of youth violence involvement, both as a victim, a perpetrator, and a witness. So I use school-based approaches, working with middle schools and high schools. I don't typically do elementary level. And then also working with police departments to try to help them learn strategies to de-escalate without violence. So I'm specifically interested in gun injury prevention. So gun injuries and fatalities and what we can do to try to make it stop. One of my current projects, all of my projects I hope are informed on the knowledge that violence is a major health disparity. So it's disproportionately impacting African-American youth, but particularly Black boys and young men. And so thinking of violence as an outcome of this pattern of racial disparities, what can we do to try to prevent that by promoting equity? And so one ongoing project that we have is trying to promote equity in school discipline, so reducing disproportionality and exclusionary discipline, and also working with the police to reduce disproportionate minority contact with the police. And I got into this because I grew up in an area that had high rates of violence. It was something that was really relevant to my life. And so I was always wondering, how can we make this stop?
Thank you for sharing that. It's important work. Christina.
All right, so my work is also around middle school, but up through college, and I focus on how people learn. So what are the study strategies that they use, their motivations that they use, and how can we equitably and inclusively create interventions to support them in using productive learning strategies, but also enhancing more positive types of motivation. So yeah, that's what I do broadly, both in middle school classrooms, focusing more like on metacognition and motivation. And then once we get to high school and college, focusing more on particular sets of study and learning strategies. I got interested into this. Actually, I started as an engineering major in college and absolutely hated it. I was the only one who was a woman in the class. All these students had lots of prior pre-engineering courses, and I hadn't even known that that was a thing you could do before you get to college. So taking that I hated it. Then I took a cognitive development and education course, actually by Gideon Dayak, who formerly was a professor here at Vanderbilt, and fell in love with it. So it's kind of, I didn't know that he was from Vanderbilt at the time. And it actually wasn't until after I took this position that I reached out and was like, guess what? You're never going to believe this, but this is kind of how my path has led. And I just kind of kept following my interests along the way. It's easy to see how the breadcrumbs create the path, but at the time I just kept following the things that I thought was interesting and I wanted to pursue.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for you all that is not on the list of questions, but something that I love hearing about from researchers, and that is how do you come up with your new research ideas? So do you have a process or a specific approach that you take? Do they just pop in your head willy-nilly? So I would love to hear you share something about that if you're willing. And maybe we could go backwards order if we'll do Christina, Krista, and Dion this time.
So a lot of times to inform my research, I work directly with students and teachers to try to understand their experiences in the classroom, the things that they're struggling with in supporting their students, because that provides real world problems that we're tackling, but then we can also apply science to it. And so it's this nice application theory kind of pipeline between the two. And so after each project, new ideas start to pop up, you start to recognize different patterns, and I'm just kind of pursuing along in that way. And then I've always been kind of interested in measurement. So also that I can play with in different dimensions. So I just have always kind of kept that throughout my research endeavors.
Very cool. Krista.
Very similar. I do, most of my work is community-based. I do a lot of participatory action research. So usually it's whatever lines up with what the community partners who I'm working with are interested in, and where I also see there's a gap in the academic research. So it always feels like there's tons more research questions than time to do the research questions.
Very cool. Dion.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. When I was a grad student, what I would do is I would read lots of papers and sort of pick them apart. And that's how I would come up with research questions like, oh, they didn't do this thing. But now that I know the literature much better, in fact, I would encourage anyone who's listening to this, if you really want to, for me, what works is knowing the literature and knowing what has been done, because it's easy. It's at that point, once you know what has been done, it's easy enough to come up with questions about what hasn't been done, and you pursue those, right? So I have a topic that I care about, I learn the literature, and I get a sense for the lay of the landscape, and from that, just generate questions. Yeah. I wish I could say it just pops in my head, but it's just knowing the literature for me helps. Yeah.
No, very cool though. Thank you all. So, and I love this next question. It really appeals to the developmental psychologist in me. So now I want to hear if you all could jump on a time machine or something like that and go back and talk with your younger self as you began to chart out your academic path. What piece of advice or kernel of wisdom might you want to pass on? So Krista, let's start with you this time.
I can give a not necessarily good answer to this. When I saw the question in advance, and I thought, I think there are a lot of things I liked better about my younger self than I like about my current self. I'm definitely a little bit more cynical, a little less hopeful. Okay. So I sometimes wish there was a way to send that forward instead of me sending something back. So I'll work on that time.
Yeah, no, I love that. I feel like I kind of feel like that about myself as well. Need some of that like young, hopeful magic to come my way. That's beautiful. Dion, what have you got?
Yeah, mine is a bit more vulnerable. When I was introduced to the academy during undergrad, I had this idea of what a professor looked like. And that's principally because of the professors that I had, which at that time were either white males or white females. And I knew that, I wanted to, like anybody, I wanted to fit in to the academy. And so early on, I found myself trying to fit into this idea of what an academic ought to look like,
Mhm.
right? That just didn't jive with me. And this created a kind of perpetual and perennial cognitive dissonance, right? Trying to fit into an image that it just wasn't me. And as I sort of progressed, and as I started to meet more folks who look like me, not very many more folks, like I can count them on one hand, but as I started to meet more folks who look like me, it was clear that they were living, like being true to themselves, right? So I'm Black, obviously, and I like hip hop, and I wear an earring, and I do all this kind of stuff. And that's not what I was seeing. And I thought for some reason, if I wanted to fit into the academy, I couldn't like be those things and like those things. But as I again progressed, I started to meet folks who look like me, who actually did do those things and who did look like that. And um, so I guess my advice would be, younger self, be you and be happy, because ultimately you are going to, become a professor being you. I got this job being exactly me, right? And I was committed to that idea. Yeah, you can be yourself and still be an academic. There is not one stereotypical picture of what an academic is, ought to look like or be like.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're so glad you're here and that you are true to yourself. So, all right, Christina, what have you got?
I mean, that's a hard one to follow, Dion. I feel all that. Definitely be you. The thing that helped me realize to be me was to find my community. So I think that was the hardest part because there aren't many. And how do you find that community that shares lots of similar things based on your identity or your experiences? But once you find the community, that was huge for me. Just to have that support and be able to shoot different things back and forth of the things you're experiencing. It's easier said than done, but the more you progress, the easier it was to start to kind of figure out how to do and develop a community.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then the next question is related to, in some ways, to the issue that Dion just raised. And it has to do with the challenges and opportunities that are associated with being faculty of color. And so if you're willing to share some information about things that have gone well or things that have felt like an impediment related to your identity, we would love to hear about it. But if you are not willing to talk about those things, that is just fine too. So for this one, I am going to let you all decide what order to talk in, so I'm not picking on a particular person.
I can start and I will not ramble. So I guess I'll just say one thing. I'm also really curious about what Deanna and Christina would say. But for me, it feels like there's so much decisional fatigue about a lot of different things. Like all the service requests, for example, what will you say yes to? What will you say no to? What are the impacts of saying yes or saying no? Are those things that you can deal with if you have experienced those impacts? And then when people do things that are obvious, like some of it is, are they doing this to me because I'm a woman? Are they doing this to me because I'm young? Are they doing this to me because I'm Black? Or is it just like them? And so there's so much thinking, there's thinking all the time. And then when it's obvious that there's a pattern of discrimination that's occurring towards you or members of your group, then you have to wonder, do I say something? Is it worth the fight? How much of my soul will I lose if I don't say something? How much, so it's like this never-ending decisional fatigue, for lack of a better word. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges because you expect people to be racist or sexist or whatever. That's not a surprise. But how much decision making you have to do every time something happens, I think that's something that's unexpected.
And I think, Krista, it's something that goes unseen, right? No one knows that you're making all those decisions and you don't get any kind of credit for doing all those decisions and extra work behind the scenes. But since I started in my faculty position, I get pinged like 3 times a week to do some service thing, and it was never like that before. So just trying to navigate which things to say yes to and no to. And thankfully we have great mentors here. So going to mentors and being like, help me make these decisions, because I am very overwhelmed in making these decisions. But a challenge too, sometimes, at least I found as a grad student, sometimes you're the only one or the first person, and that's a lot of weight to carry. I'm going to get a little emotional. But it's also an opportunity to kind of pave the path for those who come up next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Being the only one, I'm fortunate now that I'm, surrounded by all you wonderful chocolate faces and other colored faces, and I have such diversity. We can of course improve. But yeah, so for me, I've only been in this position for not too long, since August. So I haven't really had any challenges that related to being, in my case, a Black male, at least not yet. But one thing that I've had to deal with in my time actually in academy is trying to fit in and convince people that I'm not a diversity, like I'm not here for diversity reasons, right? That no, I have the aptitude to do this work. And right, this wasn't just given to me, handed to me. I had to work just as hard, if not, and actually I would argue harder actually than a lot of people. And the downside to that is, yeah, it creates a lot of stress, right? To feel like you're always trying to convince people that you belong for reasons that have nothing to do with your diversity. But the one upside is that because of that, I'm always working hard, and I'm always trying to put my best foot forward, right? And so yeah, and so and in a lot of cases, I wouldn't be in this position had I not worked as hard to try to prove that I belong, and that again, I'm not just here for diversity reasons. Um, and yeah, I mean and I don't think that that's going to go away. That feeling like I just need to convince people that I'm not here because I'm Black. I'm here because I do this, and I do this well, and I know what I'm talking about, and that kind of thing. It just it doesn't get easier. Uh, I will say that, right? But something you learn to deal with, I guess. Yeah.
I'd also say, I guess, the dealing with goes up and down. Like in my capacity to deal with any given thing on any given day, it's very variable. And so some things that I can just like ignore one day are things that are the straw that breaks the camel's back another day. And then and also related to what Christina was saying, that if you are the only one, or if you're the first, there's no grace, or at least I have a perception that there's no grace. If you screw up, you're the Black woman who screwed up. You're not yourself, you're a representative. And so that also kind of what Christina was talking about, the weight, it feels like there's a lot of weight. Obviously I can compare my experience to anybody else, but I can say for myself, it feels like weight.
Are there systems or structures that you've found helpful to offset some of the decisional fatigue or stress associated with fitting in and things like that, like things that have worked well at your previous institutions, or even things that have worked terribly? Because I think that's also useful information to have.
I would say this for me is an area of growth that I haven't figured out well. I've started to have months of no's. So like this month, every single request, it's just an automatic no, no matter who it is or whatever it is. I'm currently in a no month. And
Okay.
it's very freeing to have like those hard and fast rules. You can't do it for forever, but it's nice.
Yeah.
I also I've also I think what Christina talked about before about having like the safe community spaces. So I have a writing group twice a week with other people, members of marginalized groups who are faculty, and then we have like a little safe space to concentrate on our work, but to be in the presence of other people we can trust.
Yeah. And did that happen like in an organic way? So was that something that the faculty put together on their own, or was it something that was organized for you?
We did it.
Made it. Okay. Yeah. And Deanna and Christina, nothing yet.
I think for me, it really has been the community. That's why I said, look for that. In grad school, it wasn't something that was created for us, but by the time there were 2 or 3 of us, we would go to happy hour and just talk. And it was really transformational to have that kind of experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't, again, one consequence of being a Black man in the academy is that there aren't many Black men in the academy, right? And so I didn't, like, while I would like to say that, yeah, I had a community, I never have had a community.
Okay.
And so up to this point, at least. And so you just find strategies, and like Krista was saying, some days it's easy enough to brush off microaggressions and to not feel like this sort of a never-ending pressure to want to fit in. And in some days it's sort of like that's all you can think about. And that could be, facilitated by some interaction you had, right? And you just learn to cope. And my strategy has just been to put my head down and grind and be the absolute best that I can be at my job, so that no one can question whether or not, why I'm here. And it's not a strategy I would recommend for lots of folks. It takes a special person, but and I'm not saying I'm that special person, but it's worked for me. And yeah, so my thing is sort of just prove people wrong. Essentially, they're going to have these conceptions of you, and that's just the way how human psychology works, right? You can't change it.
Yeah.
But I'm damn sure not going to give them a reason to doubt me. That's my approach. So very Machiavellian. I'm sorry.
It's not. I'm impressed at all of your fortitude in the face of the ridiculousness that y'all have to deal with on the regular. So thank you so much for sharing those perspectives with us. We have a few lighter questions coming up, but before I transition to those, I just wanted to take a minute and make sure that we're ready to leave this space by asking if there are any questions from audience members or perspectives that folks would like to share. Jenna? You're muted, hon.
Sorry, I thought I hit unmute and then it didn't. Anyways, hi, I'm Jenna Summers. I am the writer in Peabody Communications, and I cover the psychology and human development department. And Deanna, I just kind of wanted to follow up on your last comment of, feeling as if you always need to be grinding in order to make people not question you. And to me, if I were in that position, I feel like that would be very unfair. And so, I guess my follow-up is to, I wonder, do you feel that way? Do you feel that that is unfair, that you have an obligation to be in this position of needing to always to be perfect or working harder than other people in the academy?
Yes, it is unfair. Would I like things to be different than they are now? Absolutely. But that won't be the case, at least not in my lifetime. I hope that at some point it'll be that way. I'm lucky in that I work on problems that I like, that really excite me. And anyone who knows me knows that I get really excited about my work. And so it is like, objectively, I am working really hard and I'm putting in a lot of hours, but it doesn't feel that way. And so while it's unfair, I'm lucky enough to be doing work that I enjoy, such that that hard work and that toil doesn't take a toll on me, um, um, or as much of a toll it does. Like, I'm not going to deny, like, you know, absolutely would I like to not work as hard? Sure. Sometimes, some days I'm like, I wish I can just get by, but that's just not the way it is. And for me, it was better to realize that, to accept that, and find work that I genuinely enjoy, right? So that it seems less like work. But it's unfair, absolutely. It's 100% unfair. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And I don't know if y'all got similar messages, but growing up, my dad always was like, okay, you have to get there twice as early, do twice as well, be twice as smart, look twice as good, just to be treated the same. And then the end of that was, and you're lucky because you can. Like, you are smarter. You have this capacity. But people, especially, I think the big problem is not all of us can do that. And that's like where the big major inequities come in, I think. I mean, obviously it sucks for us too. But.
Yeah, it's a lot and important to hear. Oh, Haseen, we have comment.
Just a thank you. Like, it's not easy to share those pieces.
Not, but there's going to be other people in this room. It doesn't look like now, but there could have been other people in this room who
Absolutely.
look like me, but who are not in my position.
Right.
And it's for me, I feel an obligation to be as authentic in this space as I can be. And right. So
yeah. But thank you for that. And it is, I think, you know, it's sometimes important to be reminded that you don't know what folks are carrying with them and what they bring into professional or social interactions. And hopefully for folks in this room, hearing these stories will help to remind us that we need to treat one another with a bit more kindness on the regular. So any other questions for the panelists? Yeah, Chris.
So first of all, thank you all so much. I mean, it's such a meaningful dialogue, and it has been the best part of my day so far. And I'm so sorry that you do have to work harder, and I recognize that, and I want you to know that I very, very much appreciate it. So there are a couple things that come up here, and one of which is kind of touched on, and that is our perception of scientists and your roles in helping people to understand that scientists aren't just white males, right? And I think that is an incredibly important part of what you're doing, whether it's a part of what you're doing intentionally or unintentionally. It's still coming across. And I know that workload, Krista, that you feel that extra burden of having to do that. But I want to relieve you of some of that burden by just saying it's happening, whether or not you're making that extra step or not, because you're all highly credentialed scientists who are doing amazing work. And so I want to just relieve you of some of that. Now, Krista and Christina, both of you are doing work in the community. And I know that there are additional pressures that go along with that, that don't always jive with a traditional tenure track pathway, because you are putting yourselves out there, you're establishing relationships. You have to nurture those relationships, and those don't always lead to a publication. Could you comment a little bit on the challenges you've had to undergo as a part of that process? I mean, I'll leave it at that.
I can go first. So part of the nice part of my work that balances out is I can do in the classroom work and then laboratory work at the same time to try to counterbalance potentially collaborations that don't go well or issues with getting data or but one of the challenges is preparing my research assistants who maybe have had very different experiences growing up and going into the community and trying to find ways to connect. That for me has been a huge challenge and a large amount of time, actually. I don't know, Krista, you're nodding, so.
Oh yeah, we do. I'm curious about how you do it. I've had some community partners come in and talk to the research assistants to give them kind of like a overview. We've also hired people to give us like bus tours of different parts of the community and explain factors that we should be considering. But it is, in many of our projects, I try to hire members of the community to be the research assistants so that there's not necessarily the same degree of cultural mismatch. But when it's undergrads and grad students, a lot of times they aren't, and there is that extra burden. Because you don't want somebody to say something that's going to be so offensive to a really important partner, and that does sometimes happen. I would say I don't know if anybody who does community-based work has a great solution to this problem of what counts for, like, in terms of your job versus what do you need to do to be a conscientious member of a community. And that I think that is obviously problematic. I know some different places have moved towards thinking about that as part of the tenure consideration. And some journals say that they're more interested in publishing process or participatory kinds of papers. In my lived experience, those are still 100 times harder to get published than something with empirical findings. So yeah, I don't have a good solution to that either.
And thank you, Chris. That was very nice and thoughtful to think about those other aspects.
So my next question has to do with strategies for achieving balance between your work lives, your interior lives, and your play time. So do you have any systems or strategies for ensuring that you have pockets of joy amid all the other stuff that's happening?
I can go first again. I have a 3-year-old who gives me lots of pockets of joy, and who's often trampling across campus from Susan Gray over here to Cobb's. So he makes me grounded partially because I can't do things when I have him around, but that has been a really nice pocket of joy.
Same is true for me. I don't have a 3-year-old, but I have a 21-month-old. And she is a pocket of joy. She's a handful, but she's awesome. And you know, the way I do things now is I will stop working at about 6. Like if by 6 o'clock I didn't do what I set out to do, it's sort of like, all right, I'll try it again tomorrow. And that's partly because I don't want to deprive her of the experience with her daddy. Like, I want to be able to spend time with her too. And it's nice too, because if she wasn't in the picture, I wouldn't be surprised if if I weren't here every night until 9 p.m. So like she sort of forces that. And just like Christina, like when I'm with her, there's no way I can get work done. Like I can try, but there's just no way, at least at this point. Yeah.
And I can confirm your kids are the cutest. So they provide me with pockets of joy, and I don't even live with them. Krista.
Even the smiles on your faces when you're talking about them too. I think for me, I'm not an example of work-life balance. That's not a thing. But I think the places where I have joy is when I'm in the community, like we're doing, like, even if I'm not doing any of the, I'm very far removed from actual interactions with children most of the time, but I can still sometimes go to the community centers that we work with and just play, or talking to, for me, something that's really, really helpful is talking to older adults who've been doing the work for a lot longer. Violence prevention is a major thing in our community. Everybody, no matter if you're academic or not, it's something that's very salient to you. And so people work on it in different ways. And so talking to the folks who've been working on it for 20, 30 years in much worse conditions, and then they can provide, the arc of history sweeps toward justice idea. They can provide a perspective that's helpful in helping to see the good. And I think that's really useful for me.
The way I misspoke, my daughter's 22 months as of today. Sorry.
We're all
Wanna be as-
judging you.
Yeah,
for not-
I know. I'm so, yeah, I know.
I recently argued with the dentist about the age of my son, who is 16, and I was convinced he was 15. And with him in the room, I was like, no, he's 15. He was like, Mom. So it'll keep happening, Dion. So Krista, thank you for sharing that, because that's a reminder that it's possible to find like joy and play in the work that we do as well. So I love that. So, okay, so this is going to be our last official question. And I'm wondering if you all would be willing to share a book or a podcast or a movie that has been transformational for you, something that has changed your heart and mind about things, or yeah. So, and who wants to go first? Do you want me to pick? I'm going to pick Krista.
I could not think of one. The things that I found most relevant to me are books that are painful to read and I wouldn't wish to inflict on anybody else. Things like The Color of Law or Being Black, Living in the Red, those kinds of things that are very core to how I think about the world, but aren't necessarily happy.
Yeah, well, no, they don't have to be happy, right? So like the transformational materials can sometimes be really hard and like push us into feeling discomfort on multiple levels, but that can be the kind of thing that changes minds. So I thank you for sharing that. I have those too. So like my movie tastes tend to be like in the zombie apocalypse area. So those aren't like transformational, those are just escapes. But like the books I read tend to be hard things that I learn a lot from, but I hesitate to recommend to people for those very reasons. All right, so Dion, you're up.
Sure. I am sort of like Krista. I don't have a book or a movie or TV show that's particularly uplifting that gives me, that inspires me. But I would say I do like watching documentaries about real struggle. It can be easy because we work in the ivory tower. Our jobs are comfortable, like relative to other jobs. It can be easy to forget the everyday struggle. But my family, I'm the first PhD in my family, and a lot of my family has had to struggle. And so I'll watch, shows and documentaries that depict struggle, and it keeps me grounded. It humbles me, and it reminds me that I'm lucky to be in this position that I am in. And in fact, actually, a fun fact, I like taking the city bus because I get to be around other folks, everyday folks. And I just love that feeling. So yeah, I do things that in general that ground me and that make me feel connected to other folks who aren't as lucky as me. Yeah.
So I'm clearly emotional. I cry whenever I talk about this stuff, but there's a book called Senti Pensante. It's Sensing and Thinking Pedagogy, and it's like connecting the heart and mind, but thinking about it's okay to have feelings and to show those feelings in your classrooms. And that's been a great book to read. So I'm going to just put it in the chat.
Thank you.
And then I also really like, I don't know if either of you have heard of Academic Aunties. It's a podcast. I absolutely love them. They tackle hard issues and then just bring me so much comfort that they feel similar ways about things. So I also put that in the chat as well. They're a lively bunch. Yeah, I just really enjoy that podcast.
Very cool. Thank you, everybody. All right, so we have just a few more minutes left together, and I wanted to offer folks in the audience the opportunity to ask our panelists questions. If y'all have them.
As someone who grew up with having a lot of aunties around, like the idea of academic aunties is the best. I love that.
Actually, one of my control strategies for trying to think of when I should say no is like, what would my big cousin say if I was saying yes to another thing right now? And so I also really love that idea.
Yeah, I think like the learning strategies for turning down really enticing opportunities is something that I still really struggle with. Like I often find that I'm angry at the past version of me for getting the present version of me into a situation. So I love this idea of like a no month where there's just really clear guidelines about like what you can and can't agree to that will be really helpful to me. Like I maybe will start doing that, but I'm terrible at it. So any strategies that anyone in the room has for saying no to things, I would love to hear them. I'm guessing Deanne and Christina, you guys haven't come up with your no button yet.
It's interesting. I actually find it, yeah, I have had to say no a couple of times. And what I usually do now that I'm in this position is I talk to like my colleagues who have just gotten tenure.
Yeah.
And I asked them, like, actually someone just sent me an email asking whether or not I wanted to be a part of a program committee for an upcoming conference. And one of the faculty members in the department who just got tenure came down to my office and was like, absolutely no, don't take the opportunity. It's a time sink. It was terrible. And yeah. So it's nice to have folks who are much wiser than me to ask questions because yeah. So it's easier. So when they tell me, oh, you shouldn't probably take it, then it's easy enough to say, yeah, I won't take it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been getting asked a lot, so it's getting a little easier to say no. I also have like a list of 35 ways to say no that sometimes I just use as inspiration of like, these are different things you can say, or if it's something I'm really passionate about, kind of like passing it on to someone else I think has time, or suggesting them. And then also separately emailing them saying, sorry, I did this to you. You can say no, here's what I said, can be really helpful. Just because it is hard to say no. And it makes it harder to say no when people are like, they kind of give you grief for not saying yes. I'm disappointed in that. I thought you would have been great at this, or yeah, that doesn't need to happen. But
I find it difficult to say no, even when I get an invitation. Like I do say no, but that knee-jerk desire to say yes is always there, because in my mind, it's sort of like, oh, they reached out to me, so, and they could have reached out to someone else. And so I sort of feel honored, but it's like, do I have the time?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah. So.
My favorite is I'm operating on negative time right now. So I'd love to say yes. I just can't right now.
Oh, I like that. I will probably steal that next time I manage to say no. Krista.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's a great one. I love that idea. I would also just comment, I get a lot of those guilt trips afterwards too. And I think they only pull it on specific people. So also my big cousin said, if people do that, that's just bad manners and you don't need to respond. Like, just stop. You told them to stop and they didn't stop, just drop it.
Yeah.
So.
That's definitely not on you when that happens. And I love this like idea of a list of ways to say no. I'm going to come get that from you. Chris, what do we got?
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay, on the issue of saying no, I found that it gets easier with time. But when I was first hired here, I was meeting with David Cole, and he knew that this would be an issue for me because I found it very difficult to say no to anything. So he gave me this envelope with my name on it, and inside there's this piece of paper. And maybe you got one of these too, Meg, I'm not sure.
No, obviously he didn't give you one.
No. To be pulled out, it says to be read out loud every time someone asks you for grant reviews, workshops, ad hoc manuscript reviews, or anything that isn't aimed at your teaching or research. So I have actually whipped this out of my drawer on a number of occasions, and I have David Cole to thank for that. Something else to remember, though, in terms of making it easier to say no, is to imagine what you could be doing with that time. And always to remember that things take much longer than you think they will to do. And that makes it a lot easier to say no to things that you know will take time. There's a law called Parkinson's Law that says work will always fill the time allowed for it. And it does, and then some. So just imagine what you could be doing with that time.
Yeah. Love that. All right. Thank you for sharing that. And David did not give me an envelope with a no in it. I don't know if that was strategic on his part or.
I'll give this to you. I'll loan it to you at least.
Thank you. I need it for sure.
Then how will you say no, Chris, if you loan it?
I know, right? He's sending my request to Preacher after this. I'll have his magic envelope of no. All right. Well, other questions for our panelists? I thank each and every one of you for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. I learned so much, and I'm looking forward to working with each of you for many years to come. So I'm so happy that we were able to do this. I'm standing in for Dwayne Watson, who is off doing provost business right now. So I'm happy that he got pulled away. It's not terrible. Right,
well, thank you so much for the invitation. It was fun.
Yeah, thank you.
So nice.
We'll just echo the thanks. It's interesting the ways the conversation has gone and how much people need to say no. Like that is like a key takeaway. Like we all need better ways to do that.
But we're all here. So, yes, that happened, right? You know, it's your no. I'm so glad you said yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.